2 weeks pass with a surface calm that Stephanie has learned not to trust. Kim is, on the outside, exactly what he promised to be after the apology: professional, appropriately distant. The easy warmth of the friendship recalibrated to something that looks, from any reasonable angle, entirely appropriate. He doesn't touch her again. He doesn't appear in her doorway uninvited. The compliments, when they come, stay safely inside the boundaries of professional praise. She tells herself this might be enough. That the boundary held. That 8 years of friendship and one clear conversation accomplished what she needed it to. She does not fully believe this, but she lets herself rest in it anyway, because the alternative, staying permanently vigilant, permanently braced, is its own kind of exhausting that she doesn't have unlimited reserves for. She has started making friends properly now, finally, 2 months in. A small group from the building's other companies, Winnie, who works in finance 2 floors up and has the specific bluntness of someone who has spent a decade in a male-dominated industry and stopped softening her opinions somewhere around year 3. And a few others who orbit the group loosely. Friday night, they go out. The bar is the kind of rooftop place Singapore does well: string lights, a view of the skyline, drinks that cost more than Stephanie's old grocery budget for a week. She's 3 cocktails in, the good kind of loose, laughing at something Winnie said about her terrible Tinder date from the previous weekend. Okay, but for real, Winnie says, leaning in. You've barely talked tonight. Spill something. You're too quiet for someone with a hot, rich boss. Stephanie laughs, but it comes out slightly wrong, a half-second too sharp. Winnie catches it. Wait, what was that? Nothing. That was not nothing. That was a face. Claire, who flew in for a work conference and timed it deliberately to coincide with this exact weekend, catches Stephanie's eye across the table. A small, silent communication. Do you want to tell her, or should I? It's complicated. Stephanie says finally. Complicated how? Winnie says, all the lightness gone from her voice now, replaced with the focused attention of someone who has decided this matters. Stephanie tells her. Not everything: the abbreviated version, the corridor, the touch, the apology, the 2 months of behavior that came before it. Winnie is quiet through most of it, which is, for Winnie, remarkable. Okay, she says when Stephanie finishes. First, are you safe right now? Tonight, this week, generally, I think so. He's backed off since I confronted him directly. Good. Winnie sits back. Second, tell Jin Hyun. That's what I said, Claire says. I haven't, Stephanie says. Why not? Winnie's tone isn't accusatory, genuinely curious, trying to understand the math. Because if I tell him now, he gets on a plane. He confronts Kim. Kim denies everything or apologizes beautifully. He's good at that. And then what? Jin Hyun's flown across the world, possibly lost time at his own job, possibly damaged a friendship that's lasted 15 years, and nothing has actually changed except now everyone knows and it's harder to fight quietly. So your plan is to fight quietly, Winnie says. My plan is to make sure that when I do tell him, there's enough that something actually happens. That Kim can't smooth it over with a good apology and a recalibrated smile. Claire leans forward. Stephanie, I need you to hear this. The job, the salary, the apartment, all of it, it's not nothing. I understand what it's done for you and Jin Hyun, but you cannot let the value of the job become a reason to absorb risk that you shouldn't have to absorb. I'm not absorbing risk. I drew the line. He respected it for 2 weeks, Claire says. Men like that don't stop wanting something because you said no once. They wait for a moment when saying no is harder. Winnie is nodding slowly. She's not wrong. I've worked in finance for 9 years, Stephanie. I've seen this exact pattern. Powerful man, financial dependency, a woman who can't easily walk away because walking away costs her and her family something real. She pauses. The smart ones don't escalate immediately after a clear no. They wait. They let your guard down. Then they try again from a different angle. So what do? Stephanie says. Quit. Go home. We're not financially ready for that. Jin Hyun's father's medical debt isn't cleared yet. We're not even halfway. The table is quiet for a moment. The string lights. The skyline. The specific weight of 3 women trying to solve a problem that doesn't have a clean answer. Don't risk the job, Winnie says finally. Not yet, but document everything. Every text, every comment, every moment. If this escalates again, you need to be able to prove a pattern, not just describe one. And the literal second, he does something you can't write off as ambiguous, you go straight to HR, you tell Jin Hyun, and you let the chips fall. And if he's smart enough to never give me that moment, Stephanie says. If he just keeps recalibrating forever, staying just inside the line, nobody has an answer for that. Tell Jin Hyun anyway, Claire says quietly. Not because it solves anything immediately. Because you shouldn't be carrying this alone. That's not what a marriage is for. I know, Stephanie says. I will. I just need more, Claire finishes, not quite gently. You keep saying that. I hope more doesn't cost you something you can't get back before you decide you have enough. The comment lands harder than Claire probably intended. Stephanie doesn't have a response to it. The walk back to her apartment that night alone gives her too much time to think. Winnie's advice and Claire's advice point in two different directions, and she understands, walking through the warm Singapore night, that this is the actual problem. There is no clean path here. Telling Jin Hyun now protects her marriage's honesty but risks blowing up a situation before she has leverage. Waiting protects the leverage but means carrying something alone that she has never carried alone before. In 4 years of a marriage built on not carrying things alone, she is, for the first time since she arrived in Singapore, genuinely isolated in a decision that matters. Not because nobody cares, Claire cares, Winnie cares. Even her own instincts are shouting things at her that she's trying to listen to carefully. But the actual decision, the calculus of when and how and what costs are acceptable, belongs entirely to her. Nobody can make it for her. Nobody else has to live inside the consequences of getting it wrong. She gets home, sits on her too large bed in her too quiet apartment. She opens her notes app, adds tonight's conversation not as evidence, just as a record. Talked to Claire and Winnie. Both said tell Jin Hyun. Both also said it's complicated. I don't know what the right answer is. She closes the app. She picks up her phone to call Jin Hyun and stops, the way she has stopped a dozen times now, her thumb hovering over his name. She sets the phone down without calling. She tells herself it's because it's nearly 2 a.m. in Seoul. She knows that isn't really the reason. Monday morning, Kim's behavior shifts again, and this time the shift itself feels deliberate, calculated. The recalibration Claire warned her about arriving exactly on schedule. He's careful. He's professional. He gives her space in the office, doesn't appear in her doorway, doesn't touch her, doesn't compliment her in ways that linger. For an entire week he is, by every observable metric, exactly what an employer should be. And then on Thursday evening her phone rings, not a text. A call. His name on the screen at 8:40 p.m., well outside work hours, well outside the rhythm he's maintained for a careful, deliberate week. She looks at it for 4 rings before answering. Kim, Stephanie. His voice is different, not the office voice, not the apology voice. Something quieter, more direct than either. It's late, she says. Is this about the office? No, he says. This isn't about the office. The line is quiet for a moment. What is it about? She says, though some part of her already knows, already feels the specific dread of a conversation she's been bracing for since the corridor. I've been thinking, Kim says, about what you said, about lines only needing to be drawn once. Kim, I want to understand something, he says, and his voice has shifted into something she's never heard from him before, flat, calm, almost clinical, the complete absence of the warmth that has defined every interaction she's had with him for 8 years. What would it actually take, Stephanie, for you to stop resisting me? The question lands in her chest like something physical. She doesn't answer immediately. Kim, she says finally, very carefully. There's nothing that takes. There's no version of this where everyone has a version, he says. I just need to understand yours. She is standing in the middle of her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that once felt like a gift now feel like something else entirely. Exposure, visibility, the specific vulnerability of being seen by a city she still doesn't fully belong to. I'm hanging up now, she says. Stephanie, don't call me again outside of work hours, she says. I mean that. Think about what I asked you, he says, and his voice is still calm, still flat. The voice of a man who has not once in this entire conversation sounded angry or confused or embarrassed. He has sounded the whole time entitled. Good night, Kim, she says. She hangs up. She stands in the middle of her apartment for a long time, the city lights outside the window, her heart doing something fast and uneven in her chest. She understands now completely, finally, without any remaining room for doubt or generous interpretation or 8 years of friendship clouding her judgment. This was never confusion. He has never, not once, misunderstood anything. He has simply been waiting, patiently, strategically, the way Claire warned her he would, For the moment he believed she would be most isolated, most far from help, most dependent on what he controls. He believes he is entitled to her. He has believed it for a very long time. She calls Claire immediately. It's nearly 3 a.m. in Seoul. Claire picks up on the second ring anyway. He just called me, Stephanie says, her voice shaking now in a way it didn't during the call itself, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. He asked what it would take for me to stop resisting him. There's a sharp intake of breath on Claire's end. Say that again, Claire says. Stephanie says it again. Okay, Claire says, and her voice has gone very steady, very focused, the specific steadiness of someone setting aside their own shock to be useful. Okay, this is it. This is the line, Stephanie. This is the undeniable thing. I know you need to tell Jin Hyun tonight. Right now, Stephanie looks at the time. Nearly 9 p.m. her time, 10 p.m. in Seoul. Jin Hyun should be home from his shift, possibly already asleep, possibly still awake doing the small, exhausted rituals of a man who has been running on empty for months. Stephanie. I know, she says again. I know, Claire. I'm going to call him. Now, Stephanie confirms. She hangs up with Claire. She sits with her phone in her hands. Jin Hyun's contact photo on the screen. A photo from 3 years ago. Both of them laughing at something neither of them can remember anymore. Taken in the kitchen with the 2 touchable walls. She presses call. This story is already getting pretty intense. In case you're enjoying it so far, please hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. Brace yourself because the best part is yet to come. Jin Hyun picks up on the second ring. Steph. His voice carries the specific alertness of someone who has heard something in the timing of a call. She usually calls at 11, not 9, and he knows the difference immediately. The way 4 years of marriage teaches you to read a clock as easily as a face. I need to tell you something, she says. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything. A pause. Okay, she tells him, not the abbreviated version she gave Claire and Winnie, everything. The first compliment in the kitchen, the desk edge moment, the corridor, the touch, the careful apology, the 2 weeks of recalibrated calm, and finally tonight the phone call. What would it take for you to stop resisting me? She says the words exactly as Kim said them because she understands that precision matters here, that her husband needs the actual sentence and not her summary of its meaning. Jin Hyun is silent on the other end for a long time after she finishes. Jin Hyun. I'm here, he says. His voice has changed, flattened, the exhaustion of months suddenly replaced by something sharper, more present than she's heard from him in weeks. Give me a second, she gives him the second. Then several more. Why didn't you tell me sooner, he says finally. Not angry, she can hear that clearly, the absence of anger in his voice, but something that might be worse. Hurt. The specific hurt of discovering that the person who tells you everything has been carrying something alone. Because I knew what you'd do, she says. I knew you'd want to get on a plane immediately and I didn't have anything concrete yet. I didn't want you to lose your job over a confrontation that Kim could just deny. Steph, that's not your decision to make for me. I know, she says, and means it. I know that now. I'm sorry. I should have told you the night of the corridor. Yes, he says simply. You should have. The silence that follows isn't comfortable, but it isn't cold either. It's the silence of 2 people sitting with something true that needed to be said. I'm coming to Singapore, Jin Hyun says. Jin Hyun, don't, he says. Don't tell me not to. You've spent 2 months managing this alone because you were trying to protect me from the cost of acting. I'm done being protected from that. I'm your husband. This is exactly what I'm supposed to be there for. She closes her eyes. Something in her chest, some tension she's been carrying since the corridor, loosened slightly, not gone, but witnessed finally by the person it was always meant to be shared with. Okay, she says. Okay, he repeats. I'm checking flights tonight. What about work? My father is stable. Work will survive without me for a week. A pause. You are not something I'm willing to survive without acting on, Stephanie. Not for a week, not for a job, not for anything. She is crying now, quietly, the relief and the fear and 2 months of held tension all arriving at once. I love you, she says. I love you more, he says. And for the first time in weeks it sounds completely, entirely true again, no compression, no exhaustion thinning it out. Just the thing itself, full weight, exactly as it's always been. He doesn't fly out immediately. The earliest flight he can get is 3 days out, which gives Stephanie 3 days to do something she hasn't let herself do until now. actually look, carefully and deliberately, at the structure of how she ended up here. She starts with the hearing paperwork. She still has access to her own personnel file, standard company portal. Nothing unusual about checking it. She has never had a reason to look closely before. The job offer felt simple, the kind of thing you accept gratefully without auditing the mechanics behind it. She looks now. The file shows the standard hearing sequence, application, 2 interviews, an offer letter. Except the dates don't match what she remembers. The application is dated 3 days before Kim ever called her about the position, which means there was a file open for her before the conversation she remembers as the beginning of everything. She sits very still. She digs further. The portal shows an internal hearing note, visible to her by what looks like an access oversight, a permission setting that should have restricted this to senior HR but apparently didn't get configured correctly for her specific role. Candidate identified through CEO direct referral. Position created to accommodate specific candidate profile. Priority placement, CEO discretion. Position created to accommodate specific candidate profile. Not a position existed and Kim thought of a qualified friend. A position was created. For her. Before she knew it existed, she calls Wei Ling the next morning carefully, casually, framing it as catching up over coffee rather than an investigation. Wei Ling, 2 cappuccinos in, relaxes enough to be more candid than she might be in the office. Honestly. Wei Ling says when Stephanie asks gently about how the client relations role came to exist. That role wasn't in the original Singapore office plan. I remember because I helped build the original org chart 8 months before you arrived and client relations coordinator wasn't on it. Then suddenly it was like 3 weeks before you started. Do you know why? Wei Ling shrugs. Mr. Kim said the office needed it. He's the CEO. Nobody questions org chart changes when he makes them. She pauses, studying Stephanie's face. Why are you asking? Just curious about the company's growth, Stephanie says, which is not quite a lie and not quite the truth. He talks about you a lot, you know, Wei Ling says, lighter than the words deserve. Even before you started. He mentioned you a few times in planning meetings. Said he had someone special in mind for the role. We all assumed he meant someone with great credentials. Stephanie's coffee goes cold in her hands. He had someone special in mind, she repeats, yeah. Wei Ling tilts her head, finally reading something in Stephanie's expression that makes her own face shift toward concern. Steph. Is everything okay? I'm fine, Stephanie says. Thank you for telling me this. She means it. She is grateful, genuinely, for a piece of information that confirms what she has slowly, painfully been putting together for weeks. This was never generosity disguised as opportunity. This was a position built specifically to bring her within reach. She doesn't call Kim. She doesn't confront him. She sits with what she now knows and does the careful, deliberate work of understanding its full shape before she acts on it. The salary that seemed too good. The apartment that seemed too generous for the role. The role itself, which never quite matched her actual experience level. Client relations coordinator at a company with 40 employees doesn't usually command a salary that exceeds the combined income of 2 working adults in Seoul. She had let the math feel like luck. She is starting to understand it was never luck. It was the specific, deliberate cost of access, what Kim was willing to pay to have her within reach, away from Jin Hyun, dependent enough that walking away would cost her something real. Love doesn't break because of distance, she thinks, sitting alone in her apartment that night, the floor-to-ceiling windows showing her a city she came to in good faith. It breaks because of access. She didn't come up with that thought herself. It arrives, fully formed, the way true things sometimes do when you finally stop protecting yourself from seeing them clearly. Kim built the access. He funded it, engineered it, dressed it in the language of friendship and loyalty and chosen family. The same language he used in his wedding toast, the same warmth that made Jin Hyun trust him completely for 15 years. And he has been patient. That, she understands now, is the most dangerous part. Not the corridor touch, not the late-night phone call, those were just the moments the architecture finally became visible. The actual danger was always the architecture itself. 8 years of careful trust building, a position created and waiting, a relocation package generous enough to ensure dependency, all of it constructed slowly enough that none of it, examined individually, looked like anything except kindness. She thinks about Claire's warning. The smart ones don't escalate immediately. They wait. He waited 8 years. Jin Hyun lands in Singapore on a Tuesday morning. Stephanie meets him at Changi, the same airport Kim met her at 2 months earlier with flowers, and a smile that she now understands was never simply friendship. Jin Hyun comes through arrivals looking like a man who has not slept properly in 3 days, which he hasn't, and the moment he sees her, something in his face breaks open with relief and worry and love all at once. She runs to him. He holds her the way he held her the night before she left, completely, like something he is not willing to lose to distance or to anyone else's entitlement. "I'm here," he says into her hair. "I'm here now. I know," she says. "Tell me everything," he says. "Everything you've found out since we talked." She pulls back enough to look at him. "It's worse than I told you," she says. Jin Hyun, the job, it was never just a favor. His expression shifts, the specific stillness of a man bracing for something. "Tell me," he says again. She tells him about the hearing file. The position created to accommodate a specific candidate profile. Wei Ling's confirmation he had someone special in mind. The salary that was never about her qualifications. The apartment that was never standard relocation. "He built this," she says, "all of it, to get me here. Away from you. Dependent on him." Jin Hyun is very quiet, standing in the middle of Changi Airport's arrivals hall, holding both her hands. 15 years, he says finally. "I've known him 15 years. I know he stood at our wedding. I know Jin Hyun," his jaw sets. She's seen this expression on him perhaps 3 times in their entire relationship. All of them moments she remembers because they were so unlike the soft-spoken man she married. "Where does he live?" Jin Hyun says. "Jin Hyun, where does he live, Stephanie?" She looks at her husband, exhausted, betrayed, 15 years of trust collapsing in real time in an airport arrivals hall, and she understands that the confrontation she's been trying to delay, trying to control, trying to time precisely, has arrived regardless of her timing. "I'll take you," she says. "But not tonight. Tonight we go home, we sleep. Tomorrow we do this properly together, not as a reaction." He looks at her for a long moment. "Together," he says. "Together," she confirms. He nods slowly, the urgency in his jaw not gone but contained, redirected into something more deliberate. "Tomorrow," he says. They don't sleep much that night. Jin Hyun lies beside her in the too large bed that has felt too large for 2 months, and for the first time since she arrived in Singapore, it doesn't. His arm is heavy across her waist, his breathing uneven in the way of someone whose body is exhausted but whose mind refuses to follow. "Talk to me," she says, around 2 in the morning, when it's clear neither of them is going to find sleep through pretending. "I keep thinking about the wedding," he says into the dark. His toast. He said, "Do you remember what he said?" She does. She has thought about it more than once over the past 2 months, the words taking on a different weight each time. "He said loyalty isn't about the easy moments," she says quietly. "It's about what you do when no one's watching." "Yeah," Jin Hyun says. "That's what he said." The irony sits in the dark between them, heavy enough that neither of them needs to name it. "I keep trying to find the moment it started," Jin Hyun says. "Like there has to be a moment where he changed. Sophomore year, he carried my books to the infirmary when I broke my wrist. He paid for half my textbooks one semester when I couldn't afford them and never once brought it up again, not once in 15 years. He's quiet for a moment. I don't understand how someone does that genuinely for years and also does this. I don't think people are usually one thing," Stephanie says. "I think he's probably always wanted both things to be true. The loyal friend, and whatever this is." She pauses. "I think the version of him that helped you with textbooks genuinely believed he was a good person. I think the version of him that built a job to get me here also genuinely believes he's entitled to what he wants, as long as he's generous enough on the surface to earn it. That's worse," Jin Hyun says. "Somehow that's worse than if he were just simply bad." "Yeah," she agrees. "It is." They spend the morning building the case, methodically, the way 2 people do when they've decided to stop reacting and start preparing. Stephanie pulls every piece of documentation she's quietly gathered over the past 2 months. The saved texts with timestamps, the Notes app entries logging dates and exact phrases, the screenshot of the hearing file's internal note that she captured the moment she found it, knowing instinctively that access might not last. Jin Hyun reads through all of it at the kitchen table, his jaw tight, his hands occasionally stilling over a particular text or phrase. "Glowing today," he reads aloud, flat. "It's more than that." Stopped himself, Stephanie says. That's the pattern. He tests, then pulls back if I don't respond the way he wants. The corridor, that's the one where he stopped pretending the testing was accidental. Jin Hyun keeps reading. He gets to the phone call transcript, Stephanie's reconstruction of it, written within minutes of hanging up, while every word was still fresh. What would it take for you to stop resisting me? He sets the phone down, presses both hands flat against the table, the way she's seen him do when he's containing something large. He asked you that like he was negotiating a contract, Jin Hyun says. That's exactly what it felt like. Not like a man who's confused about whether you're interested. Like a man who thinks your no is a starting position in a negotiation. Yes, Stephanie says. That's exactly it. She tells him about the hearing file's full implications. The position created specifically, the timeline that predates the phone call she remembers as the beginning, Wei Ling's confirmation that Kim had been planning this for months before Stephanie ever knew the job existed. So even the job offer, Jin Hyun says slowly, working through it, wasn't really an offer. It was bait that happened to also be real work. I think both things are true, Stephanie says. I think the company genuinely needed someone in that role eventually. I think he saw an opportunity to make that role exist faster and shape it specifically around getting me here. Why didn't he just ask you out? Years ago, before any of this. Why build an entire architecture? Stephanie has thought about this too, turning it over during the long nights of the past 2 months. Because I would have said no, she says. Immediately, easily, without consequence, back in Seoul, married to you, financially independent enough to not need anything from him. He needed me dependent first. He needed the no to cost something before he asked the question. Jin Hyun is quiet, absorbing this. That's not impulse, he says finally. That's planning. Years of it, yes. He's been planning this since before we got married. I think he's been planning some version of it for a very long time, Stephanie says. I don't think he knew exactly what shape it would take. But I think the foundation, the friendship, the generosity, the trust, I think some part of it was always being built toward something he could eventually cash in. Mid-afternoon, while they're still working through the documentation, Stephanie's phone rings. Kim's name on the screen. She and Jin Hyun look at each other. Answer it, Jin Hyun says quietly. Put it on speaker. She does. Stephanie, Kim says, his voice back to its easy, professional register. The version of him that exists during office hours, the version that has never once raised its voice or said anything that couldn't be defended in a meeting room. I wanted to check in. You seemed off yesterday. I'm fine, she says. Good. A pause. I was thinking, there's a strategy retreat next month, Bali. I want you on the planning committee. It would mean some travel together, prepping the venue, that sort of thing. I think you'd. Kim, Stephanie says. My husband flew in last night. The line goes silent for a moment. Jin Hyun's here, Kim says. His voice doesn't shift register exactly, but something underneath it tightens, audible even through the phone, even to Jin Hyun, who is sitting across the table with his eyes locked on the device like it's a live wire. He's here, Stephanie confirms. We need to talk. The three of us. Tomorrow, if you're available. Another pause, longer this time. Of course, Kim says, recovering smoothly, the professional warmth sliding back into place like a mask that's had practice. I'd love to see him. It's been too long. Dinner. I'll book somewhere nice. Stephanie looks at Jin Hyun. Your office, Jin Hyun says, quiet but clear enough for the phone to catch it. Not dinner, your office. Tomorrow morning. The silence on Kim's end stretches a half-second too long, of course, Kim says again, his voice carefully even. Whatever works. I'll see you both at 9. The call ends. Jin Hyun sits back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He sounded surprised, he says. That I'm here. He sounded scared, Stephanie corrects. For half a second, right when I said your name. That's the first time in 2 months I've heard him sound like anything other than completely in control. That evening, Stephanie sits with the full weight of what tomorrow will require. She has spent 2 months trying to manage this alone, trying to find the version of confrontation that wouldn't cost them everything. Jin Hyun's friendship with the man who'd known him since he was 18, her job, the salary that's been clearing his father's debt faster than either of them imagined possible. She understands now, sitting beside her husband in an apartment that was never simply a gift, that there was never a version of this that didn't cost something. The only choice she actually had was which costs to accept. Are you scared? Jin Hyun asks, watching her face in the lamplight. A little, she admits. Not of Kim, of what happens after, the job, the money, your father's debt. We'll figure it out, Jin Hyun says. We figured out worse with less. We had less debt then. We had less of everything then, he says. And we were still okay. We'll be okay now. He takes her hand. I'd rather be broke and together than wherever staying silent was going to take us. She looks at him, exhausted, jet-lagged. The same soft-spoken man she married 4 years ago who has just flown across the world without hesitation the moment he understood what she'd been carrying alone. I love you, she says. I love you more, he says. For the first time in 2 months, the words carry their full, uncomplicated weight. Kim's office occupies the corner of the 40th floor, glass walls on 2 sides. The harbor stretched out beneath it like something he owns along with everything else in his line of sight. Stephanie has been in this office a dozen times for Q3 reviews, for client strategy sessions, for the casual conversations that used to feel like friendship before she understood what they actually were. She has never walked into it the way she walks into it now. At 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, Jin Hyun's hands steady around hers. Kim stands when they enter. He is dressed the way he always dresses, expensive without trying to look it. The linen shirt from the airport replaced now with a tailored jacket. The easy confidence of a man who has never once in 8 years faced a room he couldn't manage. Jin Hyun. He crosses to embrace him. Jin Hyun doesn't move to receive it. Kim's arms drop, the gesture suspended midair, and something flickers across his face. Recalibration again, the same expression Stephanie has learned to recognize. A man adjusting his approach in real time. Okay, Kim says, stepping back. Sit, please, both of you will stand, Jin Hyun says. Kim looks between them. The professional warmth is still there, still deployed, but Stephanie can see the seams of it now in a way she couldn't 2 months ago, the effort underneath the ease. What's going on? Kim says. Stephanie said you needed to talk. I know what you assumed, Jin Hyun says. His voice is quiet, it has always been quiet, soft-spoken the way Stephanie fell in love with at 20, but there is something underneath it now that she has rarely heard, a current of complete, contained certainty. You assumed dinner, somewhere nice. The easy version of this conversation. Jin Hyun, I don't know what you think is happening, but don't, Jin Hyun says. The single word lands in the room with more weight than anything Kim has said in the past 2 minutes. Kim stops. My wife told me everything, Jin Hyun says. The compliments that crossed lines. The corridor. The night you called her at 8:40 p.m. and asked her what it would take for her to stop resisting you. Kim's face does something complicated, the smooth professional surface cracking for just a moment before he reassembles it. That conversation was taken out of context, he says. Was it, Jin Hyun says. Not a question, Stephanie and I have known each other for 8 years. We're friends. Sometimes friends say things that, I built a position for you to fill, Jin Hyun says, cutting through it, before the role existed, before you ever called her. We have the hearing file, Kim. We have the internal note. Position created to accommodate specific candidate profile. CEO discretion. We have your own colleague confirming you talked about Stephanie specifically, by name in planning meetings months before she knew this job existed. The room goes very quiet. Kim looks at Stephanie. You went through hearing records, he says, and for the first time his voice carries something that isn't smooth and edge thin but present. I went through my own personnel file, Stephanie says evenly, which I have every right to access. What I found there isn't something I created, Kim. It's something you wrote. Kim moves behind his desk, putting distance between himself and the conversation, the instinctive retreat of a man whose usual tools have stopped working. Let's be reasonable, he says, addressing Jin Hyun now, his voice finding its footing again. I've known you since we were 18. I was at your wedding. I've helped your family more times than I can count quietly without ever asking for anything back. Now you're standing in my office accusing me of what? Jin Hyun says. Say it. What am I accusing you of? Kim pauses. I haven't done anything that would hold up anywhere, Kim says carefully. A compliment. A hand at her back for 2 seconds. A phone call where I asked a question poorly phrased, I'll grant you, but a question, not a threat. None of this is what you're making it sound like. That's the thing about you, Kim, Stephanie says. You've always been careful to stay just inside a line you could defend later. The compliments that could be friendship. The touch that could be an accident. The phone call you'll call poorly phrased instead of what it actually was. She steps forward. But you weren't careful about the hearing file. You weren't careful about telling your own staff you had someone special in mind, months before I knew I existed to you as anything other than Jin Hyun's wife. That's not 8 years, Kim, Jin Hyun says. 8 years of friendship, and somewhere in there, you decided my wife was something you were owed. You built an entire architecture to get her within reach. You used my family's financial struggle you knew about, struggle you watched us live through, as the lever to get her here, dependent on you, isolated from me. Kim says nothing. You stood up at our wedding, Jin Hyun says, and for the first time his voice catches not with weakness but with the specific grief of watching something you trusted completely reveal itself as something else entirely. You said loyalty is what you do when no one's watching. I believed you. I've believed you for 15 years. Jin Hyun, I'm not finished, Jin Hyun says, and Kim, despite owning the floor they're standing on, despite 8 years of practiced authority, stops talking. Here is what happens now, Jin Hyun says. His voice has gone completely level, not loud, not threatening in any way that could be characterized as such later, but absolute. Stephanie is finishing her contractual notice period and nothing more. You will not contact her outside of strictly professional, documented channels for the remainder of that time. You will not appear in her office. You will not call her after hours. If you violate any of that, we go to your board with the hearing file, with the texts, with the recorded transcript of the call, and we let them decide what a CEO who builds positions to lure his best friend's wife into dependency deserves. Jin Hyun, think about what that would do to the company. To everyone who works there. I have thought about it, Jin Hyun says. I thought about it on the entire 14-hour flight here. And I've decided I don't actually care what it does to your company, Kim. I care what it almost did to my marriage. I care what you tried to take. Kim is quiet. We're not here for revenge, Stephanie says, stepping in, her voice steady. We're here so you understand completely that this is over and that we have what we need to make sure it stays over. And if I deny all of it, Kim says, a last attempt, the calculated coolness returning to his voice. It's your word, Stephanie's word, some text that can be read multiple ways, a hearing note that could be interpreted as enthusiasm rather than. Wei Ling already told Stephanie what you said in the planning meetings, Jin Hyun says. Word for word. You think you're the only person paying attention in your own company. You think nobody noticed how this job came together. Something in Kim's face finally, completely, gives way, not remorse. Stephanie watches carefully and doesn't see remorse anywhere in it. What she sees is calculation. The specific, fast recalibration of a man understanding, for the first time in this conversation, that he has actually lost. Fine, Kim says finally. The single word flat, stripped of every layer of warmth he's deployed for the entirety of their acquaintance. Fine. Jin Hyun says, she finishes her notice. I won't contact her outside business channels. This conversation didn't happen. It happened, Stephanie says. We have it documented too, in case you're wondering. Kim looks at her, and for just a moment the mask drops entirely. And what's underneath it isn't the charming friend or the predatory employer, but something smaller, something almost petulant, the specific expression of a man who has never once in his entire successful life been told no and meant it. You could have had everything, he says quietly. The promotions, the growth. I would have made sure. Don't, Stephanie says. Don't finish that sentence. You don't get to make this sound like an opportunity I turned down. You built a cage and called it a gift. Kim doesn't respond to that. We're leaving, Jin Hyun says. He takes Stephanie's hand. At the door, Stephanie turns back. You gave a toast at our wedding, she says. About loyalty being what you do when no one's watching. She looks at him steadily. I hope you think about that every single day for the rest of your life. She doesn't wait for a response. They leave. They walk out of the building into the Singapore morning, the harbor bright and indifferent below, the city carrying on exactly as it has every other day, unaware that something fundamental has just shifted in one of its glass towers. Jin Hyun stops on the sidewalk, turns to her. Are you okay? He says. She takes a breath, the first full breath she realizes that she's taken in 2 months without some fraction of it held in reserve, braced for something. I think I am, she says. I think I actually am. He pulls her into him, holds her there in the middle of the sidewalk, people moving around them on their way to work, none of them knowing what just happened 40 floors above their heads. I'm sorry I let you carry this alone for so long, she says into his chest. You were trying to protect me, he says. I understand why. I just need you to never do it again. I won't, she says. I promise. She finishes her notice period over the following month, strange, suspended weeks in an office where Kim keeps a careful, complete distance, where the warmth has been replaced by something cold and correct and entirely professional, exactly as instructed. She doesn't mind the coldness. The coldness is honest, finally, in a way the warmth never was. Wei Ling takes her to lunch on her last day. For what it's worth, Wei Ling says, "I'm glad you're getting out. I should have said something sooner. I noticed things. I just didn't know if it was my place. You told me what I needed to know when I asked," Stephanie says. That was enough. They find a new role for Stephanie before she leaves, a smaller marketing firm, legitimate, no hidden architecture, a salary that's honest about what it's paying for. It's less than Kim's company offered. It's enough. Jin Hyun's father's debt, with the savings they've already accumulated, has 6 months left instead of 7 years. "We did that," Jin Hyun says, the night before they fly back to Seoul together, looking at the spreadsheet on her laptop. "Whatever else happened, we actually did that." "We did," she agrees. The apartment in Silom is exactly as small as she remembers, both walls of the kitchen touchable if she stretches her arms out, which she does, the first night back, just to feel the shape of the space they built together before any of this happened. Jin Hyun watches her do it from the doorway, smiling. "What are you doing?" Remembering, she says, he crosses the kitchen, wraps his arms around her from behind. "We're going to get the apartment with the real kitchen," he says into her hair. "Eventually. I still want that, I know," she says, "but I don't need it as badly as I thought I did." No, she says, turning to face him. "I just need this. A kitchen small enough that I never have to wonder where you are in it." He kisses her, slow, certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't need to prove anything because everything it needs to say has already been said. Across a confrontation 40 floors above Singapore. Across 14 hours of flight taken without hesitation. Across 2 months of a secret finally, completely shared. "I love you," she says. "I love you more," he says. And for the first time since the airport in Singapore, since flowers held by a man whose generosity had a hidden price, the words carry nothing but exactly what they were always meant to carry. Outside, Seoul does what Seoul does, indifferent, luminous, entirely itself. Inside a small kitchen with 2 touchable walls, a marriage that survived distance, survived debt, survived a friend who mistook generosity for ownership, holds. Not because nothing tested it, because everything did and it held anyway. This is where the story ends. In case you haven't watched the part 1, we'll be dropping the link in the comments. And also, if you enjoyed this one, please like, subscribe, and comment your favorite part from this video. Love you guys always.